Our On the Other Hand interview today includes this comment by our guest.
But the lesson there is, what's more important about the values that guide you? Is it the label you put on it, or is it understanding better the experiences that galvanized it for you?
This is On the Other Hand. A podcast sponsored by Braver Angels Arkansas, where hope and common ground meet.
Each episode features community leaders from Arkansas and beyond, sharing stories and insights on how we can strengthen our relationships and our communities together, and in doing so, discover what's possible. In the previous part of our conversation with Mike Hemphill, who has served as co-director of the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program, Mike described the PLS's innovative approach to developing leadership among emerging leaders from across the political, professional, and geographic spectrum. Mike also described the collaboration among the presidential centers of Lyndon Johnson, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush that led to this program. And the program brings future leaders together to strengthen their leadership capacity and foster collaboration across divides. His insights help to show the potential of working together across the political divide. Now let's get to this part of our conversation with Mike Hemphill.
You've mentioned before that the program isn't about teaching leadership. It's really a leadership laboratory. A lot of us know, in one sense, what laboratory means. What does that mean in your program?
So we made a bit of a shift. I think it was probably after our second year. And we knew that we were developing the program in 2014, that it was clear this was going to be different for a lot of different reasons. I mean, one, the involvement of the presidential centers, and then our ability to invite members of those presidential administrations into sessions to talk to our scholars. The fact that we were going to have, and we have every year, President Bush, when we go to Dallas, President Bush meets with the group and has conversation with them. President Clinton meets with the group when we're in Little Rock. Still, the gravitational pull towards teaching leadership was really powerful for us early on. And I think after our second year, we realized, because we were so successful in diversifying the cohort, everybody in the cohort was at a different place in terms of what they knew about leadership, what they knew about their work. And it just didn't make sense for us to have a heavy curriculum of leadership. And instead, what we saw was, we have these 60 people together for 6 months. Let's curate an experience for them that really maximizes their opportunity to connect with one another, maximizes their opportunity to take the experience they have in the program, the speakers that come in and share their insights, or the work that we do during the sessions, not to increase their knowledge about communication, but to really help them think about their own work and how to advance their own work. When we made that move, it really did change the way we approached each cohort every year. And so it used to be early on, we have a speaker come in, we had a faculty-led session when we would say, here's what we need you to cover. Now what we do is say, this is the general area. Come in and talk about whatever you want to. Talk about what's interesting to you right now. And then we'll work at that'll become part of the experience that the scholars will use to gain some insights about their own work. And it's made for a different kind of experience, a different kind of interaction among the cohort. So that's the lab portion of it. Is everything that we do, we try to frame it, gear it towards impacting the work that the scholars are doing while they're in the program, and in the hopes that as they do that, they'll carry those lessons with them throughout the rest of their career.
One of the things, Mike, that I've read that you all do that I found very interesting is that before they even get to know each other's backgrounds or political affiliations or even where they work, I think you have them share a personal story or doing some storytelling. So I'm curious about what you do and why you chose to start there.
So I start there because that's the influence of Barnett Pierce on me, and thinking about our interactions as being these stories. April, I was thinking something you mentioned earlier about the the work that we did years and years ago in the speech department and how it's impacting the department still. That notion of the stories we tell about our life experience, about our memories, and how they influence the stories that we're making in the moment, the stories that we live, is really important. And so I brought that idea into PLS. I'll give you two quick examples. One of the things I do in our icebreaker, the very first session, is I bring groups of 5 or 6 up to the front, and I have each individual person share something about themselves that they think other people in the room might think are surprising. And it's just a way to get them to talk about themselves separate and apart from their work, their role, all those things I know that are in their mind at the moment for why they're in the program. And I'm trying to get across to them the idea that you're not in the program because you're a director of this or because you're working in this or your project is this. You're in the program because of who you are. And we want to know who you are. And so one example, we were doing this one time and one of our scholars said, well, you might be surprised to find out that I play in a recreational roller derby league. And then she shared her roller derby nickname with everybody. And of course, everybody laughs. And then what I do is I follow that up and I just ask the whole group, the other 59 people in the room, I said, okay, so show of hands, who's played roller derby? And of course, in this case, nobody's hand went up. But I said, but who's roller skated? And hands go up. And then I'll say, what about ice skating? And more hands go up. And then I say, well, what about anybody who's doing a recreational athletic league of any kind? And hands are going up. And we do this 60 times in the program. Well, by the time we're done with this session, everybody's heard a story from everybody else. And everybody has publicly demonstrated or publicly shown that in some way they are connected to that story. And so it's not just hearing somebody else's story. It's hearing that story and seeing how it fits with their own stories that begin to create that bond. Another way we do this is with our core values exercise. I have scholars select the value that really guides their work. And then I pair them up and I say, I want you to share an experience you've had in your life that galvanized that core value for you, but don't use the label of the value. And so they'll sit and they'll talk for 2 or 3 minutes and one will tell the other this story that galvanized. And then I ask the partner, their conversation partner, to try to guess what the value is. And then they switch roles. And then we do a show of hands about how many guessed correctly. And usually it's about 50%. But the lesson there is, what's more important about the values that guide you? Is it the label you put on it? Or is it understanding better the experiences that galvanized it for you? And so as in your leadership, you ought to be willing to share those kinds of stories and those kinds of experiences with the people you work with so they have a better sense of what it is that's guiding you. And more importantly, you should create frameworks of interaction that allow for other people to share those stories with you, because it's the details of the exterior of those stories that what Alan Ward would call the fact territory that really shows us where we're interconnected with one another.
You've mentioned that phrase from Alan a couple of times, the fact territory,
The
F-A-C-T?
Yeah, FACT.
Okay. How did he define that?
For Alan, it was his way of talking about the empirical world. And so, as you know, in communication, we oftentimes, especially back then, the idea was we live in this experience, in this sensory experience. We sense the world that's around us. It's the empirical world that's around us. And then we immediately label it and store it symbolically. Alan would do this exercise on the ladder of abstraction. And you start with high level abstraction that are, words, and then you come down the ladder to definitions to whatever, but the lowest rung of the ladder was what he would call, or the ladder was sitting on what he would call the fact territory, the reality, the actual empirical world that we live in. And it was his way of saying two things. One, our communication is grounded in the fact territory, but it's always constantly separate from the fact territory, because the symbols that we use to represent it are just that. They're arbitrary symbols. They're still connected, but they're always separate.
As you were talking about how the storytelling actually showed the folks or show the folks in your cohort that they are connected in some way, I was thinking about how we might be able to have the power of stories or leverage the power of stories in our own relationships across the political divide, and thinking about, if I have a neighbor with a different sign in their yard than I maybe for a candidate than I would be voting for, how would I approach them to get their story? And how might I be able to tell my story? Any suggestions on that?
That's a great example about seeing the political sign in the yard. Um, you're driving through your neighborhood and you see that political sign, or you see a flag hanging, some kind of flag hanging from somebody's house or whatever it may be. And you think of where your mind goes to and the decisions that you make about and the interpretations that you make about what you're seeing. My suggestion would be that you be patient and you think that whoever put that sign in their yard is someone who's lived a full life of experiences, and um, and that we already know that what that sign means to you is not what that sign means to that other person. But are you willing then to expand your perspective on that individual to learn more about why that sign is there instead of making assumptions or drawing conclusions about why it must be there? And so that goes back to the idea of our willingness to listen to other people's stories and the patience to postpone judgment and privilege understanding, which is a principle that we talk a lot about in PLS. And effective leadership oftentimes means suspending the desire to resolve disagreement and instead focusing intently on understanding the other, and that you can work hard to understand the other person without feeling any obligation whatsoever to agree with them. April, we live in a climate right now where I think people are confusing obstinance with leadership. And the example that you just gave, the obstinate response is to see that sign and go, oh, they must be this kind of person. But the courage that leadership takes, the courage that communication takes, demands that we broaden our perspective, that we ask questions, we listen intently to the stories that people share with us. Barnett Pierce used to say, in those moments where we believe we're in conflict with people over an intractable issue, we should ask ourselves, why would a reasonable person believe and take this perspective that this person's taking? You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to criticize it. You can just pause for a second and say, why would a reasonable person do that? Because for the most part, there are good reasons why people believe differently than we do. We just need to open ourselves up to hearing what those reasons are.
Wow. That's hard. It means that I have to be willing to go across my lawn and actually discover what some of those reasons might be and ask them to share their own story.
So two things about that. One is I would also, and I share this frequently, goes back to the idea that the times we need to communicate most effectively are a lot of times the times we don't want to. I think clearly you pick and choose your moments. Not every conversation demands that level of depth. But the more important the outcome of the interaction is, the harder I believe you need to work at it, and the more intent you need to be in terms of trying to understand the other person. And I think that's really important. And here's the second thing about that. You talk about your neighbor. I would suggest part of this broadening perspective that we should have of each other means that um, I shouldn't think about engaging my neighbor in conversation to hear the stories so I can understand better why he or she put that sign in the yard. I should be thinking about my neighbor's an important person and I should get to know them better and just hear their stories for the value that they bring me and the understanding of who they are and and the things I can learn about myself by doing that. And oh, by the way, that helps me understand better why they put that sign in their yard. Still disagree with it, but I get where they're coming from. And so you think of the storytelling, you think of you think of hearing other people's stories as a part of enriching the connections that we have with each other that then help us make better sense about the individual things that people do rather than saying, oh, why did they do that? I need to go hear their story. Sometimes you need to do that, but getting in the practice of asking your neighbor questions about how their day's gone, about the experiences they've had in their life, just as a way to get to know them better, can better serve us than when they put that sign in their yard and we're wondering, where did that come from? I think I maybe I have an idea about that.
The focus doesn't always have to be about our differences surrounding politics. The focus is on actually building the relationship with the other person, regardless of their stance. Well, as you were talking about this, I'm imagining that you have seen, since PLS has been in operation, you've seen participants really grow and change as a result of their experiences. And curious about, how some of that growth shown itself and demonstrated itself.
It's been amazing. It's one of the things that I love the most about the program is watching the impact of the experience on the participants while they're in it. And also, once they've gone through the 6-month program, we now have an alumni network of 600 alumni. And to see them stay connected to the people in their cohort, but particularly to see how they interact with those in other cohorts and how quickly they can get up to speed with things it's just a joy to watch that. But I would say there's a couple of ways that I've seen how the program has impacted people in that way. One is it puts them in an environment where they are now engaging in this, what they consider to be a highly rewarding experience, and doing it with groups of people who they would never have crossed paths with if it weren't for our program. In fact, one year we had a scholar stand up in the program. We were wrapping up one of our modules, and I was just letting them sort of share their thoughts on the last couple of days. And she started crying, and she said, this week I had the first meaningful conversation with an ultra-conservative Republican that I've ever had in my life. And she had a very progressive perspective on things. And she said, not only would I never have thought about having a conversation with somebody like him, but if before this program, if I were walking down the street and I saw him coming the other way towards me on the sidewalk and I knew what his background was, she said, I would have crossed the street to keep from talking to him. And so one of the things I think we do in the program is we give people the space and the opportunity to have those kinds of meaningful interactions with people. And I think that's super valuable. But we also see oftentimes, even during the program, that the work that people bring into the program, they'll come to us and say, because of what we've been doing here, I'm realizing this is not where I want my focus to be. I want my focus to be on something different. And so we're really happy for that. They get some focus about where they want to do their work. And then we've had people change careers. I remember a couple of years ago, our second module, it was in Little Rock, and the group was coming into the first session of the module, and one of the scholars came up to me and she said, Mike, guess what? And I said, what? She said, I quit my job. And I said, what? I said, I quit my job. I said, what are you going to do? She said, I don't know, but I quit my job. Now, that doesn't happen a whole lot. We had at one of our reunions, we had a panel of alumni, and they call themselves the Quitters Club. And it's just a group of our alumni that, for the main part, because of their experience, they've gained some clarity about what they want in their lives, and they've changed jobs, they've changed careers. I refer to them as the Adventurers Club. I like that framing better, but I think to go back to the notion of the fact territory, because we're so grounded in that in our program, it really does give all of our scholars an opportunity to examine where they are, examine their path, to think about the things that are influencing them, for them to get away from their own labels, how they've labeled their experience, and to think about the experiences that really have generated that for them. And you can gain a lot of insight that way. And I think that's been a huge impact of the program on them. There's a lot of people believe we're even genetically encoded to react, if you want to think about it just in terms of the fight or flight mechanism that we have. And so it's not easy. And it's these moments that through reflection, we think about, where did I jump the gun? Where did I make an inference or draw a conclusion? Where if I would have spent a little bit more time with that individual, I would have gained a different perspective. I'll give you I sometimes, and April, I don't know how you think about this when you're teaching communication, but I often found the best examples were sometimes the most trivial ones to help illustrate a point. But I think about times when I was younger, and when people were rude to me, I kind of took, regardless of how valid it was, I just took it personally. It just put me in a sour mood. It made me feel defensive. It made me want to give back what I was getting from them. And but I remember at some point I've changed my whole perspective on that. And so when I would go into a store and somebody, an employee was rude to me, or if I was in a meeting and somebody was rude, I got to where my initial reaction to that was the thought, I wonder what happened before I got here that put this person in the mindset of being rude to me. And let me just add that if you ask yourself that question, you also have to accept the fact that I had to accept the fact that maybe I was what happened earlier that made the person rude to me. And so it doesn't absolve you of any responsibility, but it was a way for me to think more about understanding than reacting, to think more about understanding why this person maybe is in this frame of mind right now, as opposed to immediately trying to demonstrate to them how wrong they are by either getting mad and giving them back in kind, or retreating or absorbing it and just holding it in internally. It's just a little way in those conversations that you think about what else is going on what are the spheres of influence that are impacting this person right now? And if I understood what those were, would I feel differently about this conversation? And so even sometimes the most simplest interactions can give us some insights into how we can do that.
You've got 4 different presidential libraries that are kind of banding together to sponsor this program, as I understand it. You've got Johnson, LBJ, Bush 1 and 2, and then Clinton. So they all have some, I'm sure, similarities, but also definitely have differences in their leadership style. From looking through the lens of those different administrations, what have you learned, or what have you helped your various cohorts realize about those approaches?
Glenn, as I mentioned earlier, we're not a presidential studies program or a policy analysis program. So we don't look at we'll look at the decision making that each of these presidents went through, but we're more focused on the process than we are with the result and the lasting effects of the result, or whatever it may be. And that gives us an opportunity to look at some really interesting, challenging decisions that these presidents faced. And I think it's, they're dealing with, all 4 of these presidents, as every president does, deals with the most critical issues in the most complex ways. And so in looking at the process, we do recognize that there are certainly political and philosophical perspective differences among all 4. And it's fun to look at the life experience of those individuals, each of those individuals, and how it led them to those perspectives. It's a question we ask every speaker that comes in to the program, especially those that worked in those administrations. You share with us a story that helped galvanize for you the importance of public service, just because it humanizes everybody that comes in. And so we can note the differences and obviously the different challenges they faced. Each of those presidents was presented with, vastly different issues, both nationally and internationally. But then there's a similarity among the way they approached the process, the way in which all of them valued having smart people in the room as they're making the decisions. the way all of them were focused on how all of their core values consistently guided the work that they were doing and the things that they were pursuing. And so even though you might look at the differences between George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton politically and in every way, and a hard fought, sometimes, frankly, not the most positive campaign between the two of them. But what I think was always fascinating, and I'm sure you guys have heard this story before, but after the election, one of the things that President Bush, I think President Clinton has said that's the only thing President Bush asked him as a favor was to preserve the 1,000 points of light. And it was that request from somebody who he had just beaten in the campaign, but who he truly did respect, that was part of what motivated national service and AmeriCorps for President Clinton. And so here are these two candidates who are dramatically different, but find a common value that they have, the importance of national service, the importance of the work that individuals do. And they found that connection. And then obviously in the post-presidency that just flourished. And so the issues in the decision-making differs. The process that they used there was a lot of similarities among all of them that the scholars were able to benefit from.
Thanks for joining us for this second part of today's conversation with Mike Hemphill. We hope Mike's story gave you a little more hope and a reminder that we can do good things together.
On the Other Hand is sponsored by Braver Angels Arkansas, a community of citizens working together to bridge the partisan divide and build a stronger, more connected Arkansas. Music was composed by Randall Standridge of Jonesboro, Arkansas, and was performed by the University of Northern Colorado Symphonic Band, Dr. Richard Main, conductor.
From your host, Glen White
and April Chatham Carpenter.
Join us in working to make our relationships and communities better.